Well, more from me at 3 o'clock. Now on BBC News, a special edition of Global Questions from Jerusalem, hosted by Zainab Badawi.
Hello and welcome to Jerusalem for this edition of Global Questions. Jerusalem is at the heart of the conflict in the Middle East and the competing claims for the land that makes up Israel and the occupied territories. Peace plans have come and gone, but none has succeeded. Well, now Washington says it hopes it can break the deadlock and is launching what it calls the deal of the century. Can it deliver peace for the Israelis and Palestinians, or will it be dead on arrival? Well, I'm now in the warmth of the International YMCA, an iconic landmark in West Jerusalem. And in fact, it was designed by the same architect behind the Empire State Building in New York. And through its activities, it brings together Israelis and Palestinians so they can get to know one another better. And some of them are here in our audience, and they, along with Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, will be putting their questions to our panel. Let me tell you who's on our panel. So, Naftali Bennett is a member of the Israeli Parliament, the Knesset, and as Minister of Education in Benjamin Netanyahu's government. He's been a critic advocating a tougher stand on the Palestinians. Buttu is a Palestinian-Canadian lawyer who's been an advisor to the Palestinian leadership and thus been involved in negotiations with the Israelis. We're also joined by Jawad Anani, who until 2017 was a deputy prime minister in Jordan, and he served in other cabinet positions, including foreign minister. He was also chief coordinator in Jordan's peace talks with Israel. And we have Jake Wallace, a distinguished former American diplomat who served in the US State Department under 4 presidents, both Democrats and Republicans, and has been a member of the US delegation in peace talks. That is our panel. Please give them a warm round of applause. Now, actually, before we take our first question, let's bring you this brief background to the conflict as well as efforts to try to bring about peace. It's the deal of the century, says Donald Trump, a deal that will finally bring peace to the Middle East, and controversially, it includes American recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Today we officially opened the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. Congratulations. It's been a long time coming.
Jerusalem is a city that is as disputed as it is holy. The Palestinians claim the East as their capital, but Israel has occupied it since 1967. Jerusalem lies at the very centre of a conflict that has raged ever since the State of Israel was created some 70 years ago. The War of Independence, the Six-Day War, Yom Kippur, Lebanon, the Intifadas, Gaza. War has followed war. Again and again, American presidents have sought an elusive Middle East peace. In 1978, Jimmy Carter helped Israel's Menachem Begin and Egypt's Anwar Sadat to negotiate the Camp David Accords. Starting in 1993, Bill Clinton presided over the Oslo Accords between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat. Palestinians were given limited self-government as Israel withdrew from big West Bank towns and most of Gaza. Final status talks were supposed to settle the big issues: Jerusalem, Jewish settlements, the borders and Palestinian refugees. The plan was to sign a peace deal after 5 years. It didn't happen. But a quarter of a century on from Oslo, the plan for a two-state solution is on hold. Israel still faces rocket attacks from Hamas, while Palestinian protesters along the Gaza border are shot at with live ammunition. And settlements have expanded hugely. So, 70 years after the birth of Israel, peace still seems a distant dream. what should young Israelis and Palestinians hope for or fear in the future? So, a brief summary there, setting the scene to this edition of Global Questions. Let us now take our first question from Edward Macmillan. Edward.
Are current conditions conducive to all parties accepting the deal of the century if it is presented?
Naftali Bennett.
Well, the main condition in the Middle East right now is a massive move of Iran, Shiite Iran, to sort of flank the entire Middle East and Israel from all its parts. And while there's this huge Shiite-Sunnite divide and internal war, the last thing you want to do is give up more land, which would, A, provide Iran more area to foment terror, which is what they're doing everywhere they can, and B, it would risk the very existence of Israel. So any notion of founding another Palestinian state beyond the one that already exists in Gaza is unacceptable and cannot happen.
Deanna Buttu.
Look, I think when we're talking about the deal of the century, we still don't even know what that deal entails. From what we have seen so far, the only things that it entails is rewarding Israel, whether it's the idea of giving Jerusalem to Israel or rewarding Israel's current settlement activity or allowing Israel to continue to gun down Palestinians. This is the only thing that we've seen in terms of the deal of the century. And the question that I'm left with is, what century are we really talking about? If the plan that is presented and is put forward is one that treats me and treats other Palestinians as equals, then by all means, the ground is ripe. But I'm afraid that what we're going to see is exactly the opposite. The continuation of Israeli settlements, the continuation of rewarding Israel, and the continuation of giving more and more to Israel while continuing to beat up on Palestinians who remain stateless.
Jawad Anani.
I think that the absence of peace is going to enhance Iran's influence in the region. I believe that we should, if we are going to put an end or a limitation to the Iranian influence in the region, then peace should be the word, because that's how you create strong alliances to face any enemy that may face the region. So I really find the logic rather contradictory. Secondly, I believe that we need to know what the deal of the century is all about. So far, what we heard is certain leakages, to which Mr. Naftali, you have responded to that by refusing it when you said, according to what I read in the papers, when you said that it is very close to what the Arabs have accepted in the summit of 2007 in Riyadh. That is basically there will be full recognition of Israel, and it will normalize with all Arab countries at the same time. Now, should this materialize, then we will be in a very good shape to face any outside enemies in the region.
Okay, Jake Wallace. So Jawad says we don't really know what's in the deal of the century, but the question is, whatever the deal is, the question was, are the conditions conducive to anything being presented?
Well, no, the conditions are not conducive right now for moving forward. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians are not in a position where they're prepared to make the sort of concessions that either side would need to make in order for there to be a deal. But more to the point about the deal of the century, I don't think the U.S. administration right now is well positioned to be a mediator. In order to be an effective mediator, you have to have a relationship of trust with both sides in a negotiation. Now, the Trump administration has that kind of relationship with Israel, but they have no relationship at all with the Palestinians right now. There's no dialogue between the American administration and the Palestinians. And without understanding the views of both sides and trying to find some middle ground, they're not well positioned to move forward. So my expectations for this deal of the century are actually quite low.
Well, resounding skepticism from all of you then on that question. We have a point on this from Ramallah on the West Bank, where someone has a question to put directly to President Trump.
What do you wish to achieve out of this deal? If you think it's good for your country and Israel, then we will not be bound by it because it violates our interests.
Well, sadly, we couldn't provide President Trump with a place on this panel. So in the absence of that, Jake Wallace, I'll come to you. I know you don't speak for the Trump administration, but you have had a long and distinguished career in Washington. So, I mean, the sense there from that young woman in Ramallah is that perhaps the United States is no longer seen as an honest broker.
Well, I think she's right to be skeptical about the Trump administration. I can't answer on behalf of them. I think what they're trying to do is, certainly they're well attuned to Israeli views and Israeli concerns, which have to be taken into account, but they're not speaking with the Palestinians. They're talking with the Saudis, they're talking with the Emiratis, but you can't sort of filter Palestinian views through the Arab states and expect you're going to make any progress. So I really don't understand what their motivations are, whether they're really trying to solve this or whether they're trying only to build up relationships between Israel and the Gulf states, which is a possibility.
Diana Buttu, does that reflect sort of widespread Palestinian opinion, in your view, that if any deal emerges and it's accepted by the Americans and the Israelis, then it's going to necessarily be bad for the Palestinians?
Look, I don't think that it's. I think we have to look at what the content of what the deal is, and what we've seen so far is exactly reflective of what she's saying. So far, we've seen that in the 2 years that President Trump has been president, that he's given everything to Israel, whether it's arms, whether it's money, whether it's the recognition of settlements, or the fact that he's moved the embassy to Jerusalem. All of these things are indicative that he definitely is taking a position that's a one-sided position. The people that he's surrounded himself by are also people who are very much embedded with the Israeli settler movement. So based on that, it's hard for me to step back and say, yes, this is going to be a wonderful deal. That being said, if there is the issue of equality that is put forward, then of course we're going to listen to it and take it into account. But as I see it right now, everything has been entirely carrots for Israel and entirely sticks for Palestinians.
Jay, well, I just want to ask you, I mean, you know, we've heard this kind of usual hyperbolic language from Donald Trump, the deal of the century and so on. I mean, how engaged is he? Is it just a fanciful boast, do you think? I mean, or do you believe that this is going to be one of his signature issues that defines his presidency?
Well, it's hard to say. He made a big deal about this, and I mean, he was the one who called it the deal of the century. Nobody was pushing him to take this on. He took it on himself. But since he did that in the beginning of the administration, I haven't seen that he's been involved on a regular basis, as previous presidents have been. President Bush was very deeply involved. President Clinton was also very deeply involved. So far, President Trump has left this to his advisors, Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and Ambassador Friedman. And they've been working the issue, but you know, it's more than 2 years now. We haven't actually seen a plan yet. They say they will put it out after the Israeli election in April. I think I agree with Diana. We have to wait and see what's in the plan, but I don't see the sort of engagement by the president himself that we've seen by his predecessors.
We've got a question now here in the audience from Alex Feder. Alex, your question, please.
This question is for Naftali Bennett and Diana Buttu. Describe how you think your government and your people are perceived by the other side of the conflict.
Naftali Bennett.
Well, clearly there's no love in the air between both sides. That's a reality. The other reality is that both sides are here to stay. No one's going to evaporate. So it's sort of a reality that we all have to face and understand that we're stuck together whether we love each other or don't. And we ought to build a good life for everyone as well as we can. What I'd say is it's not about Trump. It's not about a specific administration. This is something that's more fundamental. Back from 47 onto 99, 2000, 95, 2007, there's always been a deal in the air. And after the Palestinians said no, we have massive death.
But could you answer Alex's question, which is, describe how you think Israeli governments and your people, the Israeli people, are perceived by those on the other side of the conflict, like Diana? I mean, how do you perceive her opinions and so on? That was the question.
I very much respect the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. They live here. By the way, Diana before said that we were offered Jerusalem. Let me be clear. We don't need anyone to offer Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been always our capital for over 3,000 years.
That's absolutely not true.
It's nobody's Jerusalem to give us.
If we're going to play games back and forth and do an arm wrestle, believe me.
My son is named David, over the name of King David. He speaks the same language as King David and lives in the same land as King David. No one's going to give us a present. Jerusalem is ours and has always been ours. But We live together, we respect you, and we think that you should stop trying to kill Israelis, and that would sort of progress peace.
Zainab, this is the problem.
But
This is
just
exactly, and I want to
and also answer the question.
This is the problem. The fundamental problem is that Naftali Bennett is unable to even use the term occupied West Bank. He's unable to even iterate or view me as an equal or see that I actually have rights to this city as much as anybody else does. But instead, he continues to use the language of an occupier, the mentality of an occupier, and continues to engage in this idea of Jewish supremacy and Jewish superiority. So to answer your question, Alex, in terms of how it is that Palestinians see Israelis and the other way around, I can tell you because I live on both sides. In terms of the way that Israelis view Palestinians, they view us as people who are not equal. They've treated us as people who are not equal. They would not want the same treatment that they have been inflicting on us for the past 71 years, and yet continue to ignore their treatment of us. In terms of the way that Palestinians see Israelis, we see them exactly as they are, as occupiers. And so Palestinians are unable to come to Jerusalem because they need to get permission from somebody like Naftali Bennett and a 19-year-old soldier standing at a checkpoint rather than being able to come to the place of their birth and of their heritage and of their origin. That is wrong.
You know, we also ask people to bring in questions and comments through social media, and Jean Goldstein-Plesser said this also to you, Naftali Bennett and Diana Buttu. Is it possible for either of you to acknowledge the pain that the other side has experienced in this land over the last 100 years and your own people's role in causing that pain? Is there a way to admit the mistakes of your own people without delegitimizing either of your rights to exist as a modern nation state? It really builds on what Alex Feder has said there. Alex, you put your question to Naftali Bennett and Diana Buttu. What do you think about what you've just heard?
I think what each of the presenters just said is evidence of the fact that it's really difficult to understand what the other side in the conflict actually is experiencing. Similar to what Jean was just commenting on, I'm not sure that either was really able to understand what the speaker from the other side is actually saying.
Jawad Anani, do you agree with what Alex has just said, that there is a lack of understanding and empathy on both sides?
Well, let me say that at the end of the day, you know, we can go into history and probably everyone, because it is such a long history, everybody can find sufficient evidence to support their point of view. But that is not going to resolve the problem at the end of the day. Like you said, Naftali, we are two people living together, and there is no way for each of us to disengage. So what is the alternative if you don't treat your neighbor in a rather neighborly way? So therefore, you know, to continue to use the high ground of violence does not solve that. And may I quote Einstein on this particular thing? You know, I found a very interesting quote from Einstein, who was more intelligent than myself, I'm sure. Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. Understanding is the key word here, and we need to understand and learn to live, because continuously harassing children, to be honest with you, stopping people at checkpoints, denying them their basic human rights, is going to breed more violence. So where are we going to go from here? You're the more stronger party. You are the one who can afford to be more tolerant. So please do that.
All right.
So this is the beginning of understanding.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. Israel has about 8 million people in it, surrounded by 22 Arab states with almost 1 billion people. We're the only democracy where you actually go and vote in elections, including Jordan, where you actually have free elections that you vote for the leader, and all Arabs enjoy full equal rights. We established in 2005 a Palestinian state, and you quoted Einstein. He also said, if you try the same thing again, don't expect different results. We tried it.
Let's go to our next question now. Niveen Sanduka.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for your input at the panel. And my question is actually for Mr. Bennett. So elections are coming up soon. Israel Beitenu might win the majority of votes. What is your view on a two-state solution, and what is the alternative, provided what you have just said about the Iranian threat and that you want for both people to live in peace? Thank you.
Well, as I said, there's a Palestinian state in Gaza that's rapidly turned into a terror state. There's another Palestinian entity which is called Jordan, where 2/3 of the citizens of Jordan, including the Queen, are in fact Palestinian. So there's an attempt to form a third Palestinian state, this time smack in the heart of Israel, which would be an unmitigated disaster. Clearly I oppose that. What do I think that we need to do? Given that there's 22 Arab states, we need to form an autonomy which already exists. We should hope that the Palestinians will govern themselves a bit better than they have until now. They have a government, an anthem, a flag, you name it. What I would do is massively invest in infrastructure, in economy, so we can lead good lives, but don't make big mistakes. And injecting another Palestinian state just 5 minutes from here would make this location a horrible place to be, like it was in year 2000 when people were blowing up. The reason it's nice and quiet here is because Jerusalem is united under Israeli sovereignty.
So this is a two-state solution, in your view, is not feasible.
Well, it already exists. As I said, we have...
You're saying that it's in Gaza.
In Gaza, and there's the nation of Jordan is 2/3 Palestinian.
So you're making that a Palestinian state too?
Well,
okay.
I'm sure factually it is.
Okay, I'll make sure Jawad
including
Anani...
the Queen.
Okay, I'll make sure Jawad Anani gets a chance to answer that. But to come to you first, Diana Buttu, on what you've just heard.
Gaza is not a state. Gaza, as Jake knows, is not a state. When Israel pulled out, it maintained its occupation. The fact that Palestinians in Gaza need to obtain Israeli permits to get something as simple as cancer treatment in a hospital in Jerusalem, or the fact that Palestinians from the Gaza Strip cannot travel to even see their families inside the West Bank, the fact that Palestinians in Gaza cannot travel to go outside of the world is indicative of Israel's ongoing control. Plus, the fact that Israel controls the movement of each and every article. If that's not occupation, I don't know what is. But what Israel does not want to do is it does not want to relinquish control. It wants to maintain control and crush Palestinians.
I need to bring Jake Wallace in because he hasn't spoken for a while. Jake Wallace, your response to this question?
There's a lot to say. I don't know where to start.
Well, the question was on the two. The question was, is the two-state solution still feasible?
Well, I think conditions are not conducive to any solution right now. But I think if you look at the alternatives, the only one that's viable is a two-state solution. If you look at the idea of Gaza as a model for what you're trying to create, Gaza is a humanitarian crisis, and it's a security problem for Israel. That's not something you want to replicate in the West Bank.
Precisely.
And I think unless you address the core political issue, which is that the Palestinians also feel attached to this land, they also want to have a national existence here, just as Jews do. Until you address that, you're never going to solve this problem. You're just going to have perpetual conflict. That's why I come back to there's no alternative to two states.
Jawad, you heard Naftali Bennett say there is a Palestinian state. It's called Jordan, and you are indeed one of the Jordanians of Palestinian origin. I mean, what's your response to that?
Don't tell any Jordanian that you are the alternative homeland for Palestinians. They will not like that. You know, we have a peace treaty. The peace treaty, which was signed in 1994, specifically says that this is a peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. It doesn't say with Jordan that is Palestinian state. And your Knesset has approved that 118 members of the 120 who voted for that agreement. So anyway, you know, to continue harboring on the same issue that late Ariel Sharon also propagated, I think, you know, we need to think that. So please, don't lose Jordan as a friend by continuously referring
and very
to
quickly,
this point.
The question actually was, is a two-state solution feasible, Ben? You've dealt with the Jordanians.
It is a two-state solution, is the only solution.
Let's go to our next question, and our next question is from Ada Forer.
Hi. My question is, how does the rift between Fatah and Hamas affect the Palestinian people, especially those living in Gaza who support Fatah or those living in the West Bank who support Hamas? And what effect does the rift have on any viable solution with Israel?
Diana.
I'm personally somebody who thinks that the rift is pointless. It shouldn't exist in the first place. We're much more united than we are divided. But the problem is that there has been a lot of pressure brought to bear from outside forces, in particular the United States, to make sure that this rift continues. And the only person who's benefiting from it is Israel. The only party that's benefiting from it, unfortunately, is Israel.
Jake Wallace, you've been involved in Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations for a very long time, going right back to the early 1990s with Madrid. And obviously the emergence of Hamas much later on. How has that affected the dynamics of trying to bring about any kind of settlement?
Well, it certainly complicated things, and the fact that the Palestinians are split the way they are, that Fatah controls the West Bank, Hamas controls Gaza, there's no one single authority speaking on behalf of the Palestinians. That certainly complicates any negotiation with Israel. But I also agree with what Diana said, that it's important for the Palestinians to resolve this internal conflict that they have. Until the Palestinians can get their act together, there's no way that they're going to advance their national objective.
Jawad Anani, what can outsiders, obviously Jordan very close, can you do anything to bring about some kind of reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, because it's having an
Jordan
impact?
has been trying to do something about this because we think it is destructive as far as the peace process is concerned. But at the same time, I'm not justifying, but I'm saying that Gaza is one of the worst places to live in the world. I mean, there is so much pressure going on. So if we give them a chance for peace, and I'm referring to Naftali's reference to economic improvement of their life, that is extremely important for the people of Gaza.
All right. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah. Because that, you know, I mean, if you live in squalor all the time, one of the most crowded places in the world, and life is barely bearable. You know, if your father is sick or mother is sick and you cannot take it to the doctor, and she dies, I think that creates anger. So anyway, I'm not justifying what is happening. I don't want to see a single rocket aimed at an Israeli citizen, because we have peace with Israel.
All right, but can I just say, you brought up the issue of living
I want
conditions.
Israel to be more compassionate. You know, that is exactly what I believe should happen. We have to give peace a chance. Everybody must take a chance on peace.
You've brought up the situation of living conditions in Gaza. Let's go to Gaza now to get some points from Palestinians there.
The Gaza youth are in a dire situation, no future or aim, just a struggle from crisis to crisis.
My message to the Americans, look how difficult our situation is. Our people want to live, students want to learn and aspire to have their needs met.
The situation in Gaza is more than tragic. Currently, I am not able to pay for my university fees. We call on all those concerned by this problem to help us lift the blockade. We are suffocating financially and psychologically. Our living standards are much worse.
Naftali Bennett, I mean, the World Bank says that the decades-long blockade on Gaza is the key issue that is behind the suffering there. 2/3 of the people living there are suffering from food insecurity.
Absolutely. That young man from Gaza deserves a good life. And from our perspective, we only need one thing for the Gazans to say, we'll stop attacking Israel, we'll stop fighting Israel, and they can have anything. They had the choice of Singapore, but they chose Afghanistan. We handed Gaza over to Fatah, to Mahmoud Abbas. But then, about a year after, Hamas took over, killed the leadership there, and created Hamastan. That's the reality. And everyone was hoping for Singapore, but the Palestinians chose to turn it into Hamastan. The day they choose to go down the Singapore route is the day they can have everything.
I was actually involved in those negotiations, as was Jake, also involved in those negotiations. When we were negotiating with the Israeli side, one thing that we kept demanding was that Israel remove the blockade over the Gaza Strip. The blockade didn't just happen in 2006. The blockade has been in place for as long as Oslo. And what things that we were pushing for and asking for was to be able to create a seaport, to be able to create an airport, to be able to have free passage of people, to be able to have free passage of goods. What Israel instead chose was to impose a very brutal blockade. And it's the result of this very brutal blockade that we see the humanitarian disaster that has befallen Gaza. It's not at all surprising that people have been going to the fence area and demanding their freedom. The only thing that surprises me is that it's not happening each and every day.
What are influential countries like the United States and Jordan doing to help the people of Gaza in terms of the blockade? Jake?
You know, you keep on saying blockade. There is no, I won't accept a blatant lie. There is no blockade. We only blockade one thing, missiles.
No.
That's all.
No.
You can bring in all the tomatoes you want, all the clothes you want. There is no blockade. I will not accept a lie to foment itself again and again by everyone here. There is no blockade on Gaza.
You can ask
Can I just tell you what Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said in February this year? He asked for Israel to lift the restrictions on the movement of people and goods which hamper UN and humanitarian agencies without materially jeopardizing legitimate security concerns. So that's what he said. I'm just saying that's the head of the United Nations. Jake?
Well, there's a lot of blame to go around for the situation in Gaza, for sure. I think it's important to point out Hamas's responsibility for the situation there. Things have gotten a lot worse since Hamas has taken over in Gaza. But I do think it's important, given the humanitarian tragedy that's going on there, that there be more of an international effort to provide assistance to make sure that the people of Gaza get the basic needs, the food, the education, the health care in particular.
Thank you very much. By the way, you can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is #BBC Global Quest, and we're also on Facebook. Just look for BBC Global Questions. Okay, let's get on with our next question, and that is from Joshua Denton. Joshua, where are you?
I'd like to ask the panel in general, but specifically Jawad Anani, that after 70 years and 5 generations, Palestinian refugees are still being used as political pawns by Israel's opponents in a despicable attempt to delegitimize Israel. How is it moral or just to keep these Palestinians defined as refugees and kept in camps when no other group can claim hereditary refugee status and no other group has failed to find proper refuge for so long?
Jawad.
Well, thank you very much. You know, the Arab Summit in 2007 took a decision on this particular matter and added a new word, by the way, which was a just and agreed solution for the issue of Palestinians. So in a way, there is a progression going on as far as the issue of refugees is concerned. But at the end of the day, Palestinians also have aspirations. They are not just people who are looking for a place to live. Some of them still feel a deep sense of denial. And therefore, we have to accommodate that human dimension. But anyway, I believe that politically we can reach a solution that will be, I'm sure, acceptable by both parties.
Diana? This is, again, one of the fundamental problems is that you don't view us as equals. You don't view me as being somebody who has rights. My right to return is enshrined in international law. It's not a question of being a pawn. It's my right. And the problem is that Israelis want to somehow have us forget that we were ethnically cleansed from our homes when some of our homes are still standing and we still have relatives in some of these places as well. I think that what we have to recognize is that what I'm seeking and what I think other Palestinians are seeking is that we want a peace that is based on people to people, rights to rights. And you're not going to have a peace agreement if you somehow try to ignore the rights of millions of refugees. Instead, you're just going to have a perpetual conflict.
Okay, let's go back to Gaza now because we have a comment on the US deal of the century.
We call on the American people, not the US government, to stand by our people. The US administration position towards the Palestinians is unfair. we strongly reject everything being circulated about the so-called deal of the century.
Jake Wallace, I mean, part of that question was appealing to the American people, not the US government. Is that an approach that might work?
Well, we have elections in 2020 and we'll see how they turn out. What I can say is in the past, American administrations have tried to balance the relationship with Israel, which has always been very strong, with some kind of relationship with the Palestinians, where we provided assistance not just to Israel, but we also provided assistance for the Palestinians, tried to help them build the institutions of statehood and so on. So I think there's longstanding U.S. support for involvement in this process and trying to resolve this process. And I think that can be a feature of the future as we move forward.
Naftali Bennett?
Well, I think in the entire Middle East right now, the fortress which is holding back radical Islam is Israel. With our intelligence, with our cyber, with what we're doing in Syria and Lebanon, we're basically saving much of the Sunnite world from this massive Shiite launch. The last thing you want to do is take the single democratic stable state and cut it in half and create another third Palestinian failed state. That's the last thing you want to do, because the whole Middle East then will fold and collapse and implode. And that's why I think it's in America's interest to fend off this pressure to inject a Palestinian state in the land of Israel.
Deanna Buttu, your response to what you heard from Gaza?
Look, I think that in terms of appealing to the world, it's not just a question of appealing to the United States, it's a question of appealing to the world. And this is why it's so important for the boycott, the divestment, the sanctions movement to pick up, to move forward, and to push ahead. It's the only way that I think we're going to be able to move forward is if Israel is held accountable, and if Israel is no longer rewarded for its continued apartheid. This is why people from Gaza are appealing to the world, because they recognize that they're not going to get anything by speaking to the Israelis. They're not going to get anything by speaking to a U.S. administration that seems to be so wedded to the Israelis. Instead, the only path forward is through boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
We've seen some movement. The European Union, for instance, started naming some of the goods that were coming from here as made in the occupied territories as opposed to made in Israel. Do you see any momentum in this area?
Absolutely. The BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, is not only picking up, it's growing and growing and growing to the point where even Israeli politicians are ones who are pushing and trying to push back against the growing tide of BDS. The reason that it is attracting so many people and so much following is because the world sees that the way that Israel has behaved as an apartheid state. They see that Israel has been allowed to get away with murder, and that Israel continually is rewarded for its bad behavior rather than condemned for its bad behavior. And this is why the BDS movement is not only growing, but will continue to grow and will eventually succeed.
Naftali Bennett on boycott, divestment and sanctions as an approach?
It seems that the Palestinians have spent the past 71 years victimizing themselves. They've fallen in love with it, so they bequeath it to their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. You know, the Jews had the worst tragedy in world history, the Shoah, but we didn't whine for 70 years. We built an amazing and remarkable country. Now you can go ahead and BDS us. You just won't be able to wake up in the morning because the chip is built in Intel in Israel, and on your way to work you'll get lost because of Waze, and the tomato you'll try and use is a cherry tomato invented in Israel. What did you bring to the world beyond suicide terrorists? What's your invention?
You know, I think that it's very important for you to recognize one thing. The land that you were sitting on, the place that you claim that all of these wonderful things, by the way, cherry tomatoes were not invented by you, was built on my land, on Palestinian land. And the fact that you keep trying to somehow erase us and ignore us.
What's your language? Is it Arabic? Where's Arab? That's Saudi Arabia. There was no Palestinian people. It's a new invention. It's okay.
Let's go to our next question. Ben Ashraf, your question, please.
What do the recent political developments of Benjamin Netanyahu's allegiance with the Kahanist party Jewish Power mean for both the future of Israeli internal politics and perhaps more importantly the Palestinian people?
I should just explain that the Kahanist party, Jewish Power, of course, Jewish Power is the ideological successor to Meir Kahane, who was the ultra-nationalist US-born rabbi who was a member in the 1980s of the Israeli Knesset. Naftali Bennett.
I don't accept any sort of racism. However, I will not be preached by the Palestinians who spend 10% of their budget on funding murderers and murderers' family. You do not preach us about democracy, do not preach us about rights, because it's you who are killing each other, so go figure that out before coming to us and talking about peace.
So just about the allegations, the corruption allegations over Benjamin Netanyahu and whether he's going to be indicted or not, do you think he will be, and do you think he'll resign?
I hope not. Benjamin Netanyahu is a great Israeli leader. We have some disagreements, which is okay, that's part of democracy, but Benjamin Netanyahu is a remarkable Jewish leader who will always will go down in history as strengthening Israel for years to come.
And you can't resign because the elections are coming up in April?
Nope, I can't.
You can't?
No.
So you're staying put?
I'm here to stay.
You know, Zainab, there is no real difference between the Kahane party and the Likud party, and what we're talking about shades of fascism.
You don't know anything about democracy.
Let me
You have
finish.
no idea about democracy.
Let her finish her point.
Because in the West Bank, you didn't create a democracy. Don't go preaching us. When was the last elections? Hold on. When were the last elections in the PA? You know when it was? In 2007. It's been 12 years. Sure. You know why? Because they're afraid of elections because they know that Hamas will win.
Let's go to Ramallah again with a question on US government policy.
America, why did you hold up all aid to the Palestinian Authority?
America, how do you justify your aggressive measures against the Palestinian people? Is this your new policy in the Middle East?
So, Jake, that's reference to the decision that was taken in August last year by the US administration to hold up its aid from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinians living in Israel and the occupied territories. It's about $300 million, roughly. So, what's your response?
Well, I'm not going to defend the administration's decision. I think it was a mistake. As I said, in the past, we've tried to balance our support for Israel with some relationship with the Palestinians. Over the years, we've provided a tremendous amount of assistance for Palestinians through the UN organization that takes care of refugees, which we should point out what they do is that they provide schools, they provide hospitals, and they provide social services for destitute people. So those are important needs and they need to be met. The U.S. administration has also cut off the direct economic assistance for the Palestinian Authority. It's cut off security assistance for the Palestinian Authority, and it's even cut off support for private Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem. None of that makes any sense to me if you're trying to do the ultimate deal. You have to have some relationship with the Palestinians, and it makes no sense.
Do you think it's a decision that might be reviewed? I mean, do you think it's sustainable, and do you think it could be rescinded as a decision?
Well, I would hope they would review it, particularly if they're going to put a plan on the table, as they say they are. You cannot expect the Palestinians to be part of that process if you're also, on the other hand, punishing them and cutting off their assistance.
Did anyone ask why?
Well,
why was the money held back? Does anyone know?
Naftali Bennett,
Yeah, $300 million is precisely the amount of money that the PA funds the family of murderers or the murderers themselves in salaries. It would be as if America would be funding bin Laden's family. So they said, no, we don't agree. We will offset every dollar that they fund terror. We won't give them. Does that make sense? Oh, yes, it does.
I think you're
go on, Jake. Jake.
I think you're mixing apples and oranges. The money that you're talking about for the Palestinian prisoners, that's an issue with the Palestinian Authority. The money that was cut off
that's what we're talking
for UNRWA, the $300 million, that's for a UN organization, as I said, that's providing support for hospitals and schools. I think you're mixing these two things together.
Okay, let's go to our final question from Joel Rosen. Joel.
Thank you. Shimon Peres once said, we should use our imaginations more than our memories. Without referencing the past, what are your dreams for the future?
Without referencing the past, what are your dreams for the future? Jake?
I think that's a good thing to quote, which is the point being that you can't if all you do is look to the past, you can't get to a new future. I think a future has to be, as I said, a two-state solution where the interests of both sides in having a national homeland here are recognized in some way.
Deanna Buttu?
It's a wonderful question, and thank you for the opportunity to say something that I've been trying to get in, which is I actually believe that the future is a one-state solution. I believe that we are going to be living together, and I want to see us living together as equals with everybody with the same rights, irrespective of religion.
One-state solution. Naftali Bennett?
My vision for 50 years forward is for the Arabs and Jews and Israelis living here to live side by side, building good lives for their children, having a strong Israel as the support against the radical Islam, which will probably be here for another several hundred years, and building a future for everyone.
Jawad Anani?
Well, I think that the current situation is not sustainable, and so therefore I think peace is going to come whether we like it or not, because we have to live together. And so I think it is our duty to look forward, to build on the opportunities that may emerge, and if we continue to really look at each other from the dark side of the moon, as they say, quoting Neil Armstrong this time, we will not get anywhere. We have to believe that eventually all of us would benefit from the fact that we can exist. Israel has a great deal of talent that we can benefit from, and also, believe me, the Palestinians, sir, they have a great deal of talent as well.
Absolutely.
Joel, what are your dreams for the future, as speaking as clearly a member of the younger generation?
I hope my dream from the future is that we abandon the harsh rhetoric of boycotts, division and violence, and instead embrace a scenario of mutual recognition and direct negotiation.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much. That's all from this edition of Global Questions from here in the YMCA in West Jerusalem. Well, could President Trump's deal of the century breathe new momentum in trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Well, you've heard the opinions of our panel here and our audience. I'll leave it to you to draw your own conclusions. Thank you to my panel, to our audience here, and to those of you who gave us questions from the occupied West Bank and Gaza. From me, Zainab Badawi, and the rest of the Global Questions team, until the next time, goodbye.
Good morning. Could be a case of getting everything bar the kitchen sink thrown at us today. We're going to see some rain, gales, sleet and even some snow for some. Now, over the last few hours, we've seen some heavy rain and strong winds moving its way through England and Wales. And then this little weather front will bump into some colder air in Scotland over the next few hours and bring some snow.